it comes to criticism of trade deals, a lot of complaints center around how they're structured, given that oftentimes they're designed in a way that gives corporations special legal rights that ordinary citizens don't have. Our next guest, Dean Baker, explores the implications of that in his new book, Rigged: How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. Ed sat down with him to discuss exactly how concerned the public should be about that, and here's what he had to say.
Well, it should be a really big concern. I mean, people often talk about these as free trade deals, and the reality is they have very little to do with trade. I mean, in the case of the TPP, we have 11 countries in there. We have trade deals already with 6 of them, and with the other 5, most of the barriers are already low. So there's just not that much in terms of free trade in there. So it is basically about setting up a regulatory structure. And as you mentioned, it sets up this special court, which, you know, when I first heard about this, I thought someone, you know, got things confused, and I did some reading, and it's basically right. So you're setting up a special court that's outside of our judicial system, that's exclusively open to foreign investors, foreign corporations, and they appoint a 3-person panel. They get to pick one, the U.S. government picks one, and then they jointly pick a 3rd person. And they're not bound by precedent, there's no appeal, and they could overturn any, I should be careful, people yell at me, they don't overturn, they just attach a very large penalty. So the idea is that, you know, suppose a state bans fracking, foreign company says, well, we're going to invest in fracking in New York State, now we can't do it, you owe us, you know, billions of dollars. And the court goes, that's right. So the ban stays in place, they just have to pay billions of dollars to keep the ban in place. So, you know, it's something people should be very worried about. And the question I and anyone else would ask is, what's wrong with our court system? I mean, the implication is somehow foreign investors can't count on a fair deal in U.S. courts. And that's not the courts I know. And you look at, you know, the argument, they go, oh, well, it's reciprocal. We can't count on a fair deal in the other countries. You go, in Australia? Really? And they go, well, Vietnam. And, you know, I don't know enough about Vietnam's legal system. Let's hypothesize that's true. I mean, Vietnam has reasons to have a good legal system because people won't invest there otherwise. But let's just say that's true. You get insurance. You know, why on earth should the whole the whole country here be subjected to this extrajudicial process so that a foreign investor can invest in Vietnam and not have to worry, you know, the Vietnamese government might expropriate their investment? I mean, that's a risk. That's the way business works.
Well, you know, that's one of the questions that was in CETA. That was the trade deal that just got passed between Canada and the EU. And, you know, my understanding is that the Walloons in Belgium, they wanted stronger language in the treaty to preserve the jurisdiction of domestic courts to hear disputes. You know, and we know in the U.S. there's the 11th Amendment to the Constitution, which basically gives sovereign immunity to the government, to local governments, et cetera. Why does all of that matter at the end of the day?
Well, at the end of the day, this takes it away. I mean, in the sense that, you know, they determine, they're in essence a law unto themselves. I mean, I hate to overplay this, but they literally are, in the sense that you have these 3-person panels, and as I say, they're not bound by precedent. We can't go, wait a second, you violated the Constitution. You know, New York State banned fracking for legitimate health reasons. There's evidence that it causes harm in terms of poisoning, you know, well water, drinking water for people. So we want to protect people, you know, legitimate state function. And it applies across the board. It's not just foreign investors, so it's not discriminatory. So you're saying they have to pay a penalty to do that. And, you know, at least as the treaty is being presented, that is what it would mean.
Right. You know, I want to go into your book and some of the arguments that you make. You know, the sense that I got from your book is that you're not necessarily against global trade deals per se, but you're not, you don't believe that they actually bring in free trade, so to speak, in the way that they're proposed right now. That they're structured in a way that is rigged, which is the title of your book. Who is it rigged against, and what's the structure that creates that rigging process?
Well, the structure is very straightforward. I mean, our trade negotiations, you see this in the case of the TPP. We had 25 working groups. Overwhelmingly, the people on the working groups were representatives of industry, say the pharmaceutical industry working group, or intellectual property, you know, ones for transportation, for the financial industry. So it's very clear, these are business interests. Now, who it's rigged against? It's rigged against manufacturing workers. Much of our trade policy has been about putting our manufacturing workers in direct competition with low-paid workers in Mexico, in China, and other developing countries. The predicted and actual result of that is downward pressure on the wages of manufacturing workers. You got people working for $1 an hour, so our auto workers are paid $25 an hour. What's going to happen? Lose their jobs or take big cuts in pay, and that's exactly what happened. Now, we could have put our doctors, our lawyers, our highly paid professionals in direct competition. We don't do that. You can't practice medicine in the United States unless you did a U.S. residency program. Now, how on earth can someone say with a straight face, you can't be a competent doctor unless you passed a U.S. residency program? There's a lot of competent doctors in Germany and France and other countries. They didn't pass a U.S. residency program. That's what you call protectionism. But no one talks about that. That's because doctors have a lot of political power. So the idea of putting downward pressure on their wages, well, that's not discussed. We just ignore that.
Well, you know, I saw something in your book about Medicaid that I thought was a great example in terms of outlining your thinking about this. Can you give us the example that you use with Medicaid there?
Well, one of the things, I'm saying, how can we get around this? Can you do it at the federal level, do it at the state level? One of the things with Medicaid, I mention this because it is at the state level, it's administered at the state level, you have very expensive surgeries, open heart surgery, other surgeries, many of them done on a non-emergency basis. In many cases, they can be done at a tenth the cost in modern facilities, high-quality facilities in other countries. So suppose instead of paying $250,000 to have an open heart surgery done in New York or California, whatever it might be, you paid $25,000, and literally, these are the costs you're talking about to have it done in a top-quality facility in another country. You pay for the person to go there with a family member. They stay there for, a month, 2 months, 3 months, the rehabilitation period. It would still save an enormous amount of money. And you split the savings. The government gets half, the patient gets half. Everyone comes out ahead, except, of course, for the heart surgeons here who are out of the loop.
And that's ostensibly why it doesn't happen, is because they don't want it to happen.
Exactly. They don't even talk about it. And I raise this with people. Usually they look at me blank-faced and then they get angry. And I go, that's free trade. So it's fine if you want to say you're a protectionist because you want to make sure doctors have high incomes. That's not one of my goals. But, other people are protectionists. They want to protect doctors. They want to put downward pressure on the wages of auto workers. I'm more interested in the wages of auto workers.
Well, now, what about, the reimportation of drugs? Do you think that applies to the same example? Because that's something we hear about a lot.
It does in part, but I'd go even a step further, and I have a chapter in the book that talks about patent protection. Because one of the things, and again, I say this with people, including economists, they look at me like I'm nuts. I go, drugs are cheap. And they actually are. With very few exceptions, drugs are cheap to produce. So you take a drug like the hepatitis C drug Sovaldi. It's got a list price here of $84,000 for a 3-month course of treatment. You can get you get the generic, a high-quality generic, same product in India, $200.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and the idea that we have these markups, I understand we have to pay for the research, but there are other ways to pay for the research. And what we do